Well, hello. My name's Mandy, and my channel is Mandy Sorts It Out. And today I'm talking to you about my experience of grief. And I'm going to talk to you about these two people. That that's my mum and dad, and that's a photo taken when they got engaged. And when they got engaged, my mum was 17 and my dad was 19, and one of my siblings was on their way. And they're both dead now. And my mum died on the 1st of January, and her funeral hasn't happened yet. And I'm in the middle of that period between the death and the funeral that's unsettling and uncertain. But my father died in 2001 in very, very, very different circumstances. My mum had dementia for 6 years. She was diagnosed in 2020. We'd been seeking a diagnosis for some time, but of course with COVID, everything shut, so it took a while to get mum seen. And she declined quite slowly, but steadily, really. And we've been told, because there's a new death certification process that came into force in 2024, apparently, and it took a while to get the death certificate. And there was a bit of back and forth, but they told us that she purely died of dementia. Even though she was 82, she was very physically fit. It was definitely the dementia that killed her. But my father, very different. He died in 2001. He was 59, and he was killed. He was killed by a teenager who was prosecuted and found guilty for causing death by dangerous driving. He was killed as he was crossing the road. And of course, that was very, very sudden and very traumatic. It didn't happen in the UK. My dad worked abroad for most of his life. And it was abroad. It was in South America that he was killed. And yeah, I was deeply traumatized by my father's death. I think some of it was down to the fact that I didn't really know my father. He'd always travelled for work. He was away far more than he was at home. And when he was at home, he really didn't want to be bothered with us children. And if we did try to talk to him or ask him for any help or anything, he would get very irate. So we learnt very quickly not to. Saying that, my father and my mum seemed at times really, really happy. But then on the other hand, it was a hard life for my mum, with my father not there very much. She started talking about divorcing my father when I was about 8, I think, asking us in the car, if me and your father did divorce, which one of us would you live with? And questions like that popped up every now and again, but nothing really much else seemed to happen. They occasionally had big rows. We were usually asked to go play outside, and they'd have a big row, and we'd be outside waiting to come back in. And then eventually, as I got into my teens, they started splitting up. Sometimes we were told that they were splitting up, and other times we'd find sleeping bags and things behind the sofa and realise that that's where Dad was sleeping. Or there was one occasion where he used to go off. He'd wait for the household to go to bed, and then he'd go off in his car towards a hotel to stay the night. And my brother always found out about these things and let us know. And I remember the time when he was going to a hotel, I was the only person who had a bedroom that faced the front of the house. So I felt it was my duty every night to pretend to sleep, and then when I heard the car starting, get up in the dark, open my blinds, and stand and watch my dad leave. But they had split-ups ranging from an hour. I remember that one in particular because my mum had a flight booked back to the UK, and it was, I'm leaving and I'm going to the UK. And she left the house and drove off. And we were sitting in the lounge with my dad. My dad was pacing backwards and forwards in the lounge. And I remember looking at him and thinking, oh my God, you're looking after us now. Because I didn't really know him at all. And he was pacing. And then Mum's car came back. And she flung herself into the house and into Dad's arms and said, I'm not going anywhere. Oh, it was all very confusing. But then they split up for a week. And then after that, they split up for a month. And then they said they were moving to the UK. My eldest sibling was married by this stage, but myself and my younger sibling didn't want to go. We didn't think they'd stay together for very long at all without the glue of us to bring them back together. Because the reasons that they always got back together was because of us children. So we thought without us there, they wouldn't get back together. And I was actually surprised that they stayed together for a year after they moved away from Jersey back to the UK. And then they split up for good. Because my younger sibling was only 16 when they decided to leave and refused to go with them. They were 17 a few days after my parents left the island. My parents actually bought a flat for us to live in together. But when they split up a year later, they had to sell that flat, so we had to move out. My younger sibling was 18 by that point. And they both married other people. I remember my father was dating people before he met the woman that he wanted to marry. Because whenever I went to the UK, I would go visit him. I would absolutely dread it because I didn't feel I knew him. But it felt like something I had to do, so I would go visit him. He did try and keep in touch with us. He was much more attentive than he'd ever been in his entire life. But it was still a shock when he married again, and he became extremely fond of his stepchildren and extremely supportive of his stepchildren. I remember being there when his stepson had crashed the car, and he came in and said, oh, I've just crashed the car. And my dad was like, but are you okay? And then the minute I heard the words, I've just crashed the car, I braced for the screaming and shouting that would come. And his response, are you okay? And then when my stepbrother said yes, he said, well, that's the important thing. And I was like, who is this person? Who is this person? And what's he done with my dad? And then along came 2001. And in 2001, I think back to it as a year of funerals now, because 4 of my friends in that year lost their fathers. So 4 times I went to funerals and saw a wife and mother grieving at the front of the church. And we also lost my stepfather that year. He was signing into a hotel, and apparently he had a heart defect, which had never been found, even though he'd had a heart attack previously. And he just dropped down dead while he was signing the hotel register, which was again a shock, particularly for my mother. But come the September, I'd been to 5 funerals, my stepfather's and 4 of my friends' fathers. And 9/11 happened, which was horrific and shocking. And my father, who was working in South America at the time, had come back to the UK to visit everybody and couldn't get back to South America because, of course, all the flights were grounded for a while. There was no flights over America, and he couldn't get back to South America. And when he said he was going back to South America, because I called him quite a lot, because it was all at that time, it wasn't that easy to speak to people when they were abroad. I don't know what it is like now in South American countries, but at that time, you couldn't regularly get a phone line. Of course, it was expensive as well. So while he was in the UK, I called him regularly, and I knew he was going back. And when I was having my final conversation with him, I told him I loved him because I'd seen so many men buried that year. And I don't think I'd ever told him that before, and he'd certainly never told me that before. But I think he said it back. I can't actually remember that bit. I just remember that I told him. And I felt very brave and a bit shaky about doing it, but I was determined to do it. I wanted to do it because it seemed really scary after 9/11, and all these other fathers had died. And at the time I was working on a weekend, 1 day a week. We had very young children. My youngest was 2, and my oldest was, I think, around 3 at that point. So I got up early on a Saturday and I got in the shower, and I just finished my shower and my husband walked into the room, and he got my towel and brought it over to me, and I was like, what is going on? And he said, you need to get out the shower. And I was thinking, I'm getting out the shower. I finished. What are you talking about? So I got out the shower and wrapped the towel around myself, and he said, you've got to sit down. What is he doing? Has he had a nightmare or something? Is he still sort of half awake, thinking he's in this nightmare? So I sat down on the toilet, and he said, I'm afraid your father's died. And I just laughed at him. I just thought, what's going on? You know, I've only just, not that long ago, a few days ago, spoken to my father. I think he'd been back in South America about 4 or 5 days. And then I could see the sadness in his eyes. And I thought, no, he knows what he's talking about. And that was really hard. The next few weeks were really hard. I was almost incapable of looking after the children. I think my ex got some leeway from work so that he could leave early and pick the children up from school because, yeah, I just couldn't cope with it at first. And I think part of it was that I didn't know him. I wanted to know him, and I was really hopeful that in future I'd know him, but I still didn't really know him. And of course, I was never going to know him anymore. I was never going to get to know him. It's too late. I would say it took me about 10 years to get over my father's death. And what I mean by that is, of course, I mean, you can tell I'm still not over it, but to get to the point where I could live without being in pain. I mean, I think about my dad quite often, and I'm often very sad when I think about my dad. But I haven't got that constant pain. I'm not living with that constant pain that I was living with when he died. Something very strange happened to me the minute I was told and realized that he had died. And that was that it was like a film projector started in my brain. And while I was going about, from the moment I woke up until the moment I fell asleep, whatever else I was doing, this projector was projecting all the moments I'd had with my dad. And they were rolling inside my head. It made it very difficult to concentrate on anything because I couldn't stop it. I couldn't pause it. It was just constantly rolling. And some of these memories, a lot of these memories, I'd forgotten. There were things I'd forgotten. So it was very distracting. And I had no control over this at all. And I've never heard anybody saying that this happened to them. But yeah, that happened to me. And it started when I was very young, and it just carried on going until it got to the present day, and then it stopped. Losing my mum has been a very different kettle of fish. Now, my mum was a little bit of a difficult woman to have as a mother. She was quite critical and judgmental. We had some very difficult times where we both kept away from each other. Sometimes she was keeping away from me. Sometimes I was keeping away from her. She didn't appear to think very much of her children. Sometimes she'd get into these moods where she just didn't appear to think much of us. When her mother died, they spent 4 days in my grandmother's bedroom at her care home while she was dying. And my uncle phoned me afterwards to say, your mother was telling us that she was going to move house and not let you know where she'd moved to, and change her name so that you'd never find her again. And I was totally unsurprised by that phone call, because I could imagine my mum thinking that was the appropriate thing to do because her children weren't appreciative of her or something. But I did love my mum very much. And when she got dementia, the miraculous thing, and it feels like I'm saying here I'm pleased about the dementia, and that's not true really. I wouldn't be pleased about something that killed her, but the silver lining was that the first thing that the dementia attacked in her brain was whatever was causing her to be judgmental and critical, because she became loving and supportive, affectionate, and she'd never really been those things before. And I didn't quite believe it at first. I thought maybe she was sort of putting it on. Maybe she realised she'd gone too far. But eventually I realised that this was the new mum I had. This was the new mum I had that was loving and affectionate and had dementia. I think actually the change in nature and the dementia diagnosis sort of came along at the same time. And my sister and I talked about this and decided that we would rather have a mother who was a bit difficult most of her life but turned into a wonderful mother at the end, than to have a wonderful mother all your life who then turns into a difficult person at the end. I think we'd prefer it the way round we had it. But of course, dementia can work both ways. And it wasn't just to us children. She was really, really lovely to the care home staff. She was a bit of a favourite. We could tell that when she was dying, because loads of care home staff would come up in their break to say goodbye to her and say to us, oh, I loved your mum. Or she was still there. I love your mum. Your mum's so lovely. Despite those positive changes, there were so many changes in dementia that were hard, that were really hard to deal with. Particularly for me, because I was living in Jersey and was getting to the point where I couldn't have a conversation with mum on the phone because the dementia really affected her language, her verbal skills. And it was getting to the point where all I could say to her was, hello, I love you. And all she could say was, I love you. And that's basically all we could say to each other. Because if she tried to say anything else, she would just lose her words. And I decided to move to the UK because I thought, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to stop having a relationship with a mother. Would I have gone if mum had continued to be critical and judgmental? I don't know. I don't know if I'd have done it then, because it was a big thing. Leaving my home and one of my sons to move to the UK. It was a big thing. But because she was loving and affectionate, it was easy to do. And I moved to Bristol, which is where she was, where her care home was. And I started taking her out, because that's the thing she said she was finding hard, was not being able to go out. And when I visited her, I took her out all the time and she loved it. So I thought, that's something I can do. I can rent out my house and get money from that, move to the UK, rent somewhere cheaper, or I had some savings. I thought, if it doesn't quite cover the rental, which it didn't in Bristol, Bristol's more expensive than where I am now, then I can take from my savings and I can take mum out. And that's what I did. I used to take her out, and at first I could take her out for 4 or 5 hours. We'd go to the shops, we might go for lunch, might go for a walk in the park. We'd go out for quite significant periods of time. And I would take her out sometimes twice a week, 3 times a week, sometimes 5 times a week. It depended because other people in the family were seeing her, and on those days I didn't need to take her out. And for me, the hardest time, the biggest grief that I had was when I realised that I'd got to the point with Mum where I couldn't take her out anymore. And this was because she was getting anxious being outside the care home. She was also anxious in the car. She would take her seatbelt off as we were driving. She would try and open the door as we were driving. She sometimes put things between me and the windscreen, photographs or things out of her handbag she would put for me to see so that I could see them, but of course I was driving. Sometimes she misunderstood what other traffic was doing, and in her panic and in her inability to vocalize her panic, she would start hitting me to try and bring my attention to the thing that was happening. But of course, when you're driving along and everything's fine, you can see everything's fine, and then suddenly you're getting whacked. That in itself is enough to risk an accident. And I thought, I can't do this on my own anymore. And everyone else worked. So that was the end of me taking my mum out. And that was really hard. That hit me really hard. In fact, it was not long after that I started getting fatigue. And I thought that it wasn't fatigue. I thought it was depression because of the guilt and the grief of not being able to take Mum out. But yes, with Mum, people say with dementia you lose people a little bit at a time. It's like a series of little deaths, and it is. You know, when she stopped recognizing me every time I went in, that's like a little death. The more she lost her language until it became totally unintelligible, that's a little death. One of the songs I've asked to be played at the funeral is No More I Love Yous by Annie Lennox. And every time I hear that on the radio, I just well up because that's Mum. Eventually she couldn't say I love you anymore. She didn't know who I was. And there's a bit in the song, language is leaving me. Yeah, it'll always mean my mum to me, that song. The other thing that was different is when my dad died, I think I was comparing myself to other people and thinking I knew what grief should be and how it should last and what it should do. And I felt very guilty about the fact that it took me 10 years to get over my father's death. A friend from school had her brother die in extremely tragic circumstances, and she said she was over it 2 years later. And I was so shocked because my dad had died before her brother, and I still wasn't over it, not by a long chalk. But that's the thing. She had, I think, a very loving relationship with her brother. I didn't have that with my father. I mean, there was love there, but we were still very awkward around each other. We didn't know each other, other than the fact that I told my father I loved him, because I did love him. And I knew he loved me. We just didn't know each other. But when Mum died, I'd been able to tell her I loved her loads of times, loads and loads of times, because after Dad died, I thought, anyone can go at any time. I'm telling them I love them now. So I told my mum I loved her every time I spoke to her on the phone after that point. And we weren't a family that ever said that. I think it started then because after that, my mum started saying it to people too. So that was something good to come out of my father's death. So that determination to say things to people then and there and not wait. And I'm not worried this time about whether I'm doing it right, whether I'm grieving right. I'm just grieving. That's all. I haven't got all that other worries and concerns, and that's that's down to events that happened in my life that have made it so that I'm not so hung up on things like that anymore, which I'm very, very grateful about. If other people think my grief isn't enough or isn't the right sort of grief, well, that's their problem, not mine. If people think I'm not doing the things I should be doing with Mum with regard to her death, again, that's their problem, not mine. I wasn't like that with Dad. I think that's part of what made it last so long, is that I couldn't be honest about my grief. I hid it from everybody. I think it hurt me much longer than it needed to because of that. So yeah, that's the story of my mum and dad. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video. I hope to see you on my next video. Take care. See you soon. Bye.